All right. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Ma. I am the coordinator of the Seaweed Longleaf Conservation Cooperative. And we're here tonight to talk about some cost share opportunities for forest landowners that are available. I just wanted to point out real quick, this is the first in a series. First of it is our webinar series that we're hosting tonight. We'll have 2 in-person workshops available in Charleston and in Georgetown. Our Charleston workshop will be on Monday, August 22nd at the Low Country Land Trust office on Rutledge Avenue. You can see the address right there on the slide. And our Georgetown workshop, in-person workshop, will be on Monday, August 29th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Clemson Baruch Institute at Hobcob Barony. And you can see the address on there. But everyone, welcome. In the chat box, you'll also find the registration for those 2 in-person events. And we just want to thank y'all for being here and taking time out of your Monday evening. I know Monday's a pretty frantic time, but thank y'all for being here. Without further ado, we'll get started. And I'm also kind of running the technology in the background here, so I'm still admitting guests, so I'm kind of multitasking, so bear with me. So anyway, what I'll ask you to do is, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, we've got a great panelist lineup, panel of speakers tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. And right away, what we're going to do is I'm going to throw a poll out to y'all. And basically what I want to know is where y'all coming from this evening? You know, the Seaweed Longleaf Conservation Cooperative covers a 4-county geography. So where's your land reside, or where do you reside, or what is most applicable to you? Awesome. Okay. All right, so we're skewing pretty heavily to the Charles. Oh, here we go. A little bit different there. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Very cool. Well, welcome everyone. Here are the results. But we've got a great panel lined up for you this evening. But before we get into the meat of this evening, I just wanted to take a little bit of a moment to introduce the Seaweed Longleaf Conservation Cooperative. We're a public-private partnership made up of various local land trusts, state and federal agencies. You can see the various partners there on the slide. But we cover a 4-county geography: Charleston, Berkeley, Williamsburg, and Georgetown counties. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do at the Seaweed Longleaf Conservation Cooperative, you're more than welcome to visit our website, seaweedlongleafcoop.org. Again, my name is Patrick Ma, and I'll kind of be the MC this evening. But if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I'll display my contact information at the end of the slideshow. But without further ado, we're going to hear from our friends at South Carolina Forestry Commission in Grace Anna Cooper and Austin Phillips. So.
Hi, good afternoon or evening, I should say. I'm Grace Anna. I'm our project forester for the Williamsburg and Georgetown counties. My counterpart is Austin Phillips, sorry, Austin, and he covers Charleston, Dorchester, and Berkeley, and we'll be tag teaming this presentation for you today.
Thank you, Grace Anna.
So first off, some of our services that we offer, we do prescribe burning for landowners. We also help with the maintenance and construction of fire breaks. Both of them we do for a fee. And then we're going to talk about a few different cost share programs. We as the state have 2 cost share programs, and then we do a lot of the work for some of the federal programs that Debbie's going to talk about. So a lot of the times, if you're meeting with us to learn about cost share, we'll partner with Debbie or some of the other NRCS offices and get you in line for the best program for you. And then we also are going to talk about some of our burning cost shares that we have, which is going to be under the Urban Wildlife Urban Interface Program and the Stevens Fund.
So I'm going to talk about the first cost share program, the Forest Renewal Program, and you may hear it referred to as FRP. And this program is for establishing forests and managing forests. And so this pertains to landowners who are having any kind of clear cut or final harvest done, or even potentially if you are having agricultural fields converted into a pine plantation. And some of the management practices that are cost shared under this program include chemical and mechanical site prep burns, and hand or machine planting of loblolly or longleaf pine. And then we also do provide some cost share for timber stand improvement or a release of a stand. Next, there you go, Patrick. So the eligibility for this program are any non-industrial private landowner. It does have a minimum and a maximum, so a minimum of 10 acres or a maximum of 100 acres. You must maintain the land in a forested condition for 10 years or until commercial harvesting. If the land is sold before 10 years is up, the new landowner must continue the program, or previous owner will have to repay all the cost share received. And the landowner cannot have the same acres of land under another program in a given fiscal year, state or federal. And all commercially standing timber must be removed from the selected acres for funding before the plans can be made. And there is a spacing requirement or density requirement of any variation to give 500 to 700 trees per acres. We typically recommend a 7 by 10 spacing. And then after the first year of growth, there must be a minimum of 300 stems per acre present after that first growing season. And we do a seedling survival to check that the year after the planting is done. And it's one of my recommendations to a landowner that's going to apply for this is I would say to contact your project forester while your timber is actively being harvested, because this is a first come, first serve program. And the sooner you can get your application in, the better your chances are for being funded. So that's just kind of one of my pieces of advice to a landowner that would like to apply for this program, or even our Southern Pine Bugle program, which Grace Anna will be talking about. So I guess you could go over to the next slide, Patrick.
Yep.
This is a document that I send out to landowners who request an application, and it just kind of goes step by step into to the process of what all you would need to do to go through the process. So that's mailing your application, and then the letter that you would receive from your project forester after the site visit had been done and they make their recommendations. And then after that part, you would begin talking to site prep and tree planting contractors to go ahead and line the work up. And then when you get if you get your application approval letter, then after the site prep is completed, you just send your invoices to your project forester and they come out, check it, and they process all that information to the people in Columbia, and then they send you your check. So that's kind of how that works. And then same for the tree planting. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we do the seedling survival to check your survival rate after that. And then that next slide, Patrick, is what the approval letter would look like. So if you were approved, you would receive a letter such as this that shows you your acreages and your cost share rates and how much cost share is available to you. Do you have anything to add to that, Grace Anna?
Mm.
Oh, sorry, you're muted, Grace Anna.
Geez, I thought I unmuted it. I'm sorry. No, I think you did a great job, and the FRP contracts or the Southern Pine Beetle contracts are very, very similar. So as we go throughout the slides, you'll see there's the only real difference is going to be the amount of funding you get. But so next slide, Patrick. So this program is Southern Pine Beetle program, or we call it the SPB program. The main purpose for this program is for mitigating Southern Pine Beetle, whether through a wider spacing when you reforest the stand or through a pre-commercial thinning. So this program is a little bit different because there's not a acreage minimum or maximum. It's a price value of $10,000. So we can only match up to the $10,000 max. So if you're having, if your site prep is going to be chemicals, so controlled by chemicals, you might get a little more than 100 acres versus if you're doing a 3-pass heavy mechanical, you're not going to get quite 100 acres. So the best thing to do is to definitely contact me or Austin or whoever your project forester is, and we'll kind of line you up with what program is going to be the best fit for you. Next slide, Patrick. So on the reforestation side or the restoration side, it's again, one of the differences here is that you can't plant this for this program. You can't plant an ag field. It has to be a cutover area. And one of the biggest things is that when you do a site prep spray, it has to be a really, really good kill. So usually we want a 90% kill rate. And when we go out and look at the Southern Pine Beetle track, our Columbia admin is a big stickler that it needs to be at that rate, especially for loblolly pine, because if you're trying to mitigate having Southern Pine Beetle, you don't want to have a lot of natural loblolly pine in your stand. So we have to have a really good site prep spray, and then we have a really specific spacing for loblolly and longleaf pine. So for your loblolly, you have to plant it on a 9x10 spacing, or if it's a wetter site, needs to be bedded, then it'll be a 7x12 spacing. And then the longleaf has to be an 8x10 spacing. And again, that's just to help mitigate Southern Pine Beetles from getting into your stand. Planting on a wider spacing, we found really has helped with that. The cost share rate for this program is 50%. And a lot of the same things apply that Austin was talking about. It still has to be kept in trees for 10 years. It has the same application form, the same W-9 form. A lot of that housekeeping stuff is the same. So next slide, Patrick. The other part of this one though is the pre-commercial thinning. So any stand of timber that is 4 years old up to commercial thinning size, we will help you do pre-commercial thinning if it's needed. And it has to be at least 700 pine stems per acre for it to be eligible for this program. So that's when Austin and I will come out and take a look at it and see if you meet the qualifications. Typically, this is going to be a stand where it's either a natural stand of pine and a lot of naturals blew in, or it's a planted stand and it's just dog-haired thick. There's no max age, but if you can thin it, we're not going to pay you to do pre-commercial thinning. We'd rather you just make a good timber sale and do the thinning. And the main thing is with this one is at the end, after it's either done mechanically or manually with chainsaws or with bush hogging equipment or masticating or whatever method you go about, is that there has to be 545 stems per acre. And then usually this pre-commercial thinning is 60% of we cost share 60% of it. That $110 an acre is actually an old number. I think it's went up a little bit, but it is 60% of the cost up to our statewide average. I'm gonna send it back to Austin to talk to you a little bit about WUI.
Yeah, so one thing I would add is you can apply for both. You can apply for FRP and Southern Pine Beetle. I actually just had a landowner this past year that applied for both, was funded through both, and then he picked the one that he wanted. So yeah, you can put in for both and just kind of see what happens, and then pick and choose. If you get one, or if you don't, then you have another one to fall back on, hopefully. But so now we're gonna talk about the Wildland Urban Interface Program and who is eligible. So the practices in this are prescribed burning, mechanical methods such as forestry, mulching, and then also fire break installation. If the track is located near an at-risk community, which is defined as a community that has completed a wildfire risk assessment with a rating of moderate or higher and is comprised of at least 10 houses clustered within sight of one another. So you don't have to make this assessment yourself. You can call your project forester, and we will come out and do the community risk assessment. And we can make a map of the property and the surrounding areas and determine whether or not you'd be eligible. And then down here where it says the Stevens funds, that kind of falls more under some of your Charleston County and Berkeley County landowners. If you're, let's see, within 10 miles of USDA forest, so your Francis Marion, there is a grant which is called Stevens funds that is available to you, that it provides great cost share opportunities for prescribed burn, for all the practices here listed: prescribed burning, mechanical, and then fire break installation. So if you are within that area, give me a call and I'd be happy to come do an assessment and see what kind of stuff you could qualify for. And the goal of this is to reduce the threat to life and property by conducting fuel mitigation practices within the wildland urban interface. So there's a couple of different funding levels. So the first year that you put in for this, you get 100% funding for the rates above for fire breaks and burning. And then the acreage being funded for the second time reduces to 50% for burning, but 100% for fire breaks. And then on your third year, or your third application, you would be only funded for fire break installation.
All right, and so another assessment that we do is anytime a landowner calls us, we can just come out and give you general guidance. A lot of the times when I meet with a landowner, I ask them if what their kind of objectives are. Sometimes they don't know. They say, tell me what my objectives are. And so I kind of pull some information out of them, like, do you like to hunt? What kind of animals do you like to hunt? Are you more in this for pine production or pine straw? And a lot of the times Austin and I will go out there and we'll make assessments and we'll give you some options. So if you're dead set on timber production, we'll give you that option, and then we'll give you some wildlife options, and then we'll really work with you to give you a plan for your property. And it can be, usually we like to have it to be at least 10 acres. Most of the time you can't find a logging crew to come in and do any work for anything smaller than 10 acres. But we'll definitely work with landowners. And then Patrick, next slide. We also do a stewardship plan, and that's going to be your more in-depth plan. That's where it's a 10-year plan for landowners, and it will kind of cross over with some of the stuff that Debbie's going to talk about with CSP, where that plan's more in depth because it has to be to our tree farm certification. So it has to encompass BMPs and historic sites and stuff like that. So if you're wanting a long-term plan, the stewardship plan is going to be what you want. But if you just want a quick and dirty, what's on my property, help me get to my goals, that's going to be this rural forestry plan that we do. I have landowners ask me all the time, and I hate to tell you, but since we work for the state, we can't tell you timber prices. We can just give you like what last quarter's prices were. Honestly, Austin and I, 9 times out of 10, have no idea what timber is going for in our area. We just tell you from a management standpoint if it's ready to be cut or if it's not ready to be cut. So we can't act as a timber buyer. We can't tell you how much timber is going for. We can't help you with your timber boundaries, but what we can do is point you in the direction of some consultants that can do all of that for you, point you in the direction of surveyors or nurseries or whatever other resources you need. If we can't help you with it, Austin and I will be able to point you in the right direction. And one of the last points I want to hit on is, like Austin was saying, a lot of our cost share, we can help you with other agencies as well. Like Debbie's going to be talking and we overlap a lot. So if our program's not the best fit for you, we'll point you in the direction that will be. And that's the same with all the other panelists that are going to be talking to you. A lot of us can overlap and we'll be able to help you.
All right, thank you, Grace Ann and Austin. Quick transition, just with Jenny Haskell up next with the Longleaf Alliance. If you need to bail out of the webinar early, I just wanted to let you all know that we will be providing a recording of this webinar after we'll follow up with you in an email with all the information that you with the PowerPoint slide deck and recording of the webinar. So without further ado, Jenny Haskell.
Hi, everyone. I am Jenny Haskell. I'm with the Longleaf Alliance, and the mission of the Longleaf Alliance is to ensure a sustainable future for the longleaf pine ecosystem through partnerships, landowner assistance, and science-based education and outreach. So basically, we are a nonprofit, and we just act to promote the longleaf ecosystem and provide people with information on, who to connect with, or how to plant trees, or who to reach out to for seedling sources. And we will also tell you if your property is not really a good candidate for longleaf. As much as I want to get longleaf on the ground, I don't want it to go in a spot that's going to be a challenge for people to plant or grow longleaf. So while we are here to promote it, we want it to be on the right site. Next slide, Patrick, please. So within South Carolina, we have 3 partnerships, and we use, across the Southeast, we have these longleaf implementation teams, which try to focus a lot of energy in areas that are known to grow longleaf. So in South Carolina, we have the Solo Ace Longleaf Partnership. We have the Seawee Longleaf Cooperative, or Conservation Cooperative, and we have the Sand Hills Longleaf Partnership up in the Chesterfield County area. So Patrick and I work together here in the Seawee area, and I also manage the LIT for Solo Ace, and that area is the southern area along the southern area of South Carolina that encompasses everything between the Savannah River and the Edisto River, from Edgefield and McCormick counties all the way down to Beaufort County. So if y'all have any questions about cost share opportunities in these areas, I can help you with that. Next slide. So one of the funding opportunities that the Longleaf Alliance helps to administer is a seedling reimbursement program. And last planting season, this graph shows what we helped to establish last planting season. And so this is the number of seedlings. And so we, with help from the Arbor Day Foundation, we helped to get just over 8 million seedlings planted last year. And in South Carolina, we planted 1.7 million seedlings, and that ended up being over 12,000 acres just in seedling reimbursement. I think it's pretty cool to see, how successful South Carolina has been in establishing longleaf compared to other states. And I don't know if it's because we have a really great timber market and folks are doing a lot of maybe species conversion, or converting from other land use, maybe, converting from ag fields to longleaf forest, or converting from loblolly forest to longleaf forest. I don't know exactly the reason for these numbers. It may be just a reaction of outreach and letting folks know that we have an opportunity to help with some seedling reimbursement. But I think it is really, really interesting to see how many seedlings have been funded here in South Carolina. Next slide. Yeah, so some of the other cost opportunities we do to aid in longleaf restoration.
Well, I think we might have just lost Jenny. She was saying that she was having internet issues earlier because of the storms over in the Aiken area. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and jump up to Debbie Mann with NRCS, and we will see if we can't get Jenny back into the Zoom call to close this out. So Debbie, I hope you're ready.
I'm ready. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah.
I'm Debbie Mann. I'm the district conservationist in Georgetown for Natural Resources Conservation Service. And while this is, obviously geared towards longleaf, we have a lot of programs that deal with a lot of different conservation practices due to resource concerns. So go ahead, Patrick. These are really our two main programs for conservation practices. We have other wetland programs and things like that, but this is geared more towards what we're talking about this evening. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program, that is really a cost share program that encompasses all land uses as well. Conservation Stewardship does also. But in the forestry side of it, it does include fund pools for longleaf, which is being the target here. Also with other forestry practice, understory, tree planting, burning, prescribed burning. I think as you all heard, we do work hand in hand with our partners, other agencies, South Carolina Forestry Commission, Longleaf Alliance. I will, as Grace Anna said, usually when I talk to my landowners and it's forestry related, I try to make them realize that there are other opportunities, because as with them, our cost share is competitive. And there is a lot of demand for those incentives and that cost share. So that way it gives the landowner several opportunities to potentially get some cost share. Environmental Quality Incentive Program can be 1 year, it can be 3 years. We try not to go more than 3 years with that program for practices. Sometimes they are, just depending on what's going on. The Conservation Stewardship Program is always 5 years. There is no 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years. It's always a 5-year program. Go ahead, Patrick. That's why I just showed this. As with both programs, the potential for financial assistance and technical assistance is for all different land uses. With the forestry, once again, I'll go again and tell you that majority of it can be burning, understory, and we do the same thing. We try to get with our landowners and determine what their objective is. What are your goals with your land? If you're predominantly doing just timber harvesting and timber management, are you looking for that mix? And most of the time, I find most of the ones I work with, they're looking for a little bit of a mix. So they do want to add a little bit of the wildlife benefit to their management scheme. And I will say, with our forestry, all of our practices have technical specifications. You're going to know up front what is required of you. And you are also going to be required to have a private forester or South Carolina Forestry Commission. You can go either way with recommendations. We do require a professional recommendation for the land, as most of us are not foresters. So we do steer people that way. That is one of the requirements. Go ahead, Patrick. Again, prescribed burning with our longleaf has been a very important practice, as well as for even someone that's just managing loblolly. And with the same thing, if you are funded for this under the fund pool, you're required to have a prescribed burn manager, have a burn plan, everything as part of your management plan. They're pretty strict about that. Landowners can do it, but they do have to have, if they're qualified, and they do have to have a burn plan signed by a registered burn manager. Our Forestry Commission has been great. Y'all have done some great burns for us too, so that's been really helpful. Go ahead, Patrick. And I'll just show some of these. We under our environmental quality incentive program and our conservation stewardship program, we have a lot of fund pools. So everyone's not lumped into the same fund pool. We have our ag, we have new and beginning, we have socially disadvantaged, we have longleaf, we have the quail initiative. So you may find that when you come into the office, we often try to find out the best fit. There are requirements for all of them. A new and beginning farmer, new and beginning landowner has to have not been actively filing benefits for the last 10 years. So anytime within 10 years, you're still considered a new and beginning farmer. Even if you're in the longleaf pine initiative, you can still be under a new and beginning farmer program. So we'll just find, we usually do that as, we're working with landowners. Most of our, longtime landowners, they come back, and even though you've been funded 1 year, you can, as long as you're not double dipping, you're not doing the same practice the next year, the next year, you can come back in multiple years each year, because we found that people tend to build upon their conservation planning, where they initially get started small, and then they tend to, once they get going, find more things that they want to add to their management, to their conservation. A stewardship plan, Graciana, you mentioned that. Those are great. I mean, I've got some landowners that have done a great job following. You guys do a great job with the stewardship plan. And they can be, obviously, as she said, much more simple. And even with our private foresters, they can be as simple or more detailed long-term, depending on what the landowner wants. Go ahead, Patrick. This is just showing our initiative area. You will find with our programs, longleaf priority areas, which are historically longleaf, do get more benefit or more points as everybody gets on the same ranking when we're doing these funding pools. And for the same reason that Jenny mentioned, is we want to know that those longleaf are going to those areas, and those soils that are prime longleaf soils, not your wetter, lower soils, where I've seen longleaf be successful, but it's a challenge, a huge challenge in those areas. So you will see that there are priority put on those areas and on the soil type, which is extremely important. Go ahead, Patrick. There again, this is just showing your priority areas. And it's expanded over the years since I started. When we first were looking at it, it was really predominantly your low country, upland, coastal areas, but as time's gone on, it's expanded a little bit. Patrick. Working lands for wildlife, it's the same thing. These fall under the initiatives. You'll see the gopher tortoise, which that's actually, those are geared towards counties around Allendale, Hampton area, down along that way. And then you also see your northern bobwhite grassland areas, and well, of course, you're looking at some other ones because they threw in sagebrush, which obviously we don't have here. But that's where you see that those priority is put on those, especially as you can see the South Carolina part of it. The lower part of it is geared more towards the gopher tortoise. Go ahead, Patrick. Conservation practice used to manage, store, and with your longleaf pine. But Patrick, the next one should show the different practices. And here you're seeing, as I said, burning's been a very important part of with us with the longleaf, just with not only keeping the other loblolly and other trees out, shrubs, but it also helps facilitate the grasses, native grasses, and help control wildfires, keep those fuel loads down. I've seen places that, and as you guys obviously see more than I do, but just huge fuel loads that really is a challenge to get them back under management. Usually within our conservation plans, and I know for me, if I'm planning longleaf, I automatically add a burn into that conservation plan to encourage and facilitate that, starting to get into that management scheme of doing that management. We get a lot of people, as they get their more mature longleaf, they want to do some other understory work where they want to add some, pollinator habitat. They want to add some grasses, witches, all both go hand in hand with the burning. I've also seen some places where over those years of them doing that management, they get some great natural native understory. But as long as that too, you also see the woody competition. We do also get issues with invasives, obviously, where you'll see your privets or wisteria have been the big ones here for me, where we will do some of those understory management, brush management to control some of the invasives that are a problem, can be a problem. Go ahead, Patrick. Fire breaks. Also, as you'll see with our specifications, that's a requirement when we do our forestry. We're required to put those in our planning for good reason. People need to have the access and with the benefit of it and maintain them for the life of that contract. We do have cost share for all those practices. I tend to stay away from it. It's on a statewide cost. You may, when you go online, you will see 75 and 90% cost share. I try to stay away from it because it's not actually tied to what receipt you may have or what you may turn in. That's actually based on a statewide cost estimate per unit, per linear foot of fire break, per acre of burning, per acre of tree planting, herbicide, brush management, everything. And it changes a little bit every year because they try to base it on what actually costs with that cost share. I mean, I'm not sure what we'll see within the next couple of years as you see fuel costs going up. You'll often see our cost share try to adjust to that. So you'll know up front exactly per unit, if you're funded, per unit cost for that practice. You're going to know exactly how many feet, and you'll know within that contract if you're contracted for 50 acres of planting, at the end the planting ends up being 40, it's going to be revised down to 40. So we do it by that, and we do it by the exact measurements with what the final practice is installed. And the same thing, we do a field visit before, we do a field visit after. There's been many times I've done a field visit and questioned, what was out there and was concerned about the trees or the spacing or survivability. And Grace Ann has gone behind me and checked it out and sent me, updates of it. So we always go back to rely on the foresters if we have questions on those too. Go ahead, Patrick. Forestry improvement. I think you all were talking about that earlier. That is one of our practices. There is some cost share to do pre-commercial thinning. And, for wildlife habitat, for forest management, to reduce volunteers, as you can see, reduce the density, create patch openings, reduce overabundant fuel, very many things. But as the same thing, we go out, we evaluate. You can see the pictures down the bottom where, the understory was in there, as into the next, you see from the heavy fuel to the open, almost not, I won't say savanna, lower density and your understory. And that can be done with, we've done it with mechanically with like an environmental brush cutter type gyrotrack, herbicide also, or burning. And then usually if we include one of those practices in there, we like to follow with a burn and get that into the management so it doesn't end up back like you're seeing in the picture at the bottom. Patrick, go ahead. And here's your brush management, talking about your invasives. As I said, with me here, the wisteria and the privet has been probably my predominant ones here. Tallow is huge. That's another big one. I don't see it quite as bad in my forest, but there are areas here that we do have them. And that's usually with us, obviously, it's going to be mostly a herbicide. And with practices like that, we do allow more than one treatment. So under like our environmental quality incentive program, I had a landowner with a big problem with wisteria and privet. And so we put it in there a year and then we allowed him a follow-up. All of our practices will have maximums of allowing you to do that. But we do have some of these kind of practices you can do more than once as part of your management because it's more than likely going to be needed. Go ahead, Patrick. Herbaceous weed treatment, basically the same thing. I hate to admit, but at one time we helped plant bicolor, I believe. but you know, it is what it is. You will see a lot of that. Bahia, that's neither here nor there with us. Bamboo's a huge problem, but same thing. These are the exotics that we try to hopefully encourage it to go back to more of a native mix, much more diverse. With our wildlife habitat planning, pollinator habitat's been very popular. Just people wanting to add a little bit of diversity. And I've seen some great plots. It takes a lot of patience to really get it started, but I've also often found that, you know, once they get it going and you start seeing some of that management, a lot of those natives were already there, and they're coming back just from getting that good management going. We just help it along maybe a little bit earlier. Go ahead, Patrick. These are the practices I stated. The tree shrub establishment, we require a site plan. Also, as you mentioned, you are not eligible to truly, you can apply, but you're not truly going to be eligible for cost share or go into an actual eligible application until the timber is cut. So as you said, often, a lot of times I'll encourage people, if they're in there starting to cut, go ahead and do it, because the recommendations are going to be on the harvested timber. We also found that sometimes, obviously, timber contracts can be long, and if weather changes, they can get extended. So that is one of the requirements to actually get that contract approved. That timber has to be harvested with the recommendations. Go ahead, Patrick. Site prep, same thing. We'll go by the forester's recommendation, whether it does need to be the chemical, flat plant. Obviously with longleaf, you're just going to see usually a flat plant, a chemical, sometimes maybe a scalping, and either mechanical or hand planting. And those with us are, I don't think I've ever seen anybody not plant containerized. Go ahead. I went ahead and let this in there, totally veering away from the forest management, but just to let you guys know that wetland restoration is one of our, it falls under one of our programs. We do have a wetland restoration easement program. It is an easement program. I'm not saying that you can't do some other things, as long as that's, you know, falls within regulations within a wetland, because we're very restricted on what we can do within a wetland. But I have worked on quite a few wetland reserve easement programs with restoring that. One of the primary criteria for the program is the hydrology has to have been altered on some level, whether it's been logging roads or dams or something that has changed the hydrology within that ecosystem, within that area, something that we can actually restore. I get a lot of questions, people coming in just wanting to protect wetlands, but they are basically in their basic form. There have been no changes to it. They are very, very strict easements. I tell people that if they're looking at wetland reserve, quiet enjoyment is the most important line, I think, in that easement. You really can't do any kind of timber harvesting, timber management, or anything. There are obviously some management practices allowed, and we work with our biologists and other agencies to determine, you know, what specific management can be done, because there are places where they burn and they do native stuff, and may even have like an interior little food plot area. Those areas can be managed. So it's a pretty good program where it fits, but it is very restrictive. So I've seen them really do some good stuff at restoring. Go ahead, Patrick. This is Conservation Stewardship Program. Remember, this is the 5-year program, and these are just some examples of enhancements. Our enhancements are really like taking our basic practice and we sort of take it up a level. There's a lot more involved with criteria. There is usually a forest management plan required and a lot more documentation required often than some of our EQIP. Our EQIP is a very basic part of it, but you can see here converting loblolly, implementing sustainable practices for pine straw raking, forest management to enhance understory. I believe there's a link at the end of this, but you can literally go on to our conservation stewardship program and you can look at every one of these enhancements and look at the requirements, the documentation, and everything that's required to be within that program. I try to be very conservative when working with this program and not overly plan for a landowner, but try to look at a couple things that they want to do, because you can get very bogged down with some of the enhancements with the requirements within them. But usually the same thing, we do a site visit and try to find what fits well with the management and what can take that management that the landowner's already doing and take it to the next level. So what happens is you get a stewardship payment, which is a very basic payment. And then you also have a practice or enhancement payment that's tied to the year that you do that. And within this program, you may have a couple of years at the end that you're not doing any practices and you're just getting a basic stewardship practice. As with anything else, this is a competitive and it's a 5-year program. I will mention with our programs, everything tends to run a year behind. Like we're working now on finishing up a little bit of EQIP and working on conservation stewardship program. And for EQIP, these were literally applications that were, I think the cutoff last fall was 1st of November, end of October. It varies a little bit. It's not the exact same cutoff. You can apply all year long, but then we have to do a cutoff and then for applications. And after that cutoff period, we take those applications and those are the ones that get worked that fiscal year. And conservation stewardship program is the same. They are different sign-up period cutoffs. Conservation stewardship tends to be in the spring of when we had that cutoff. I'm just now working on ones that I believe the cutoff was late March this year. And then we work with the landowners, do site visits and go from there. Go ahead, Patrick. This just giving you an example. If you get approved, you're gonna have a plan with us. You're gonna have maps. You're gonna have soils maps. You're gonna have everything you can imagine, job sheets that are all going to be in this packet if you do get funded for the program. Go ahead, Patrick.
Hey, Debbie, we're going to have to wrap up real soon, all right?
Okay. Oh my God. So longleaf, saying pollinators and benefits. You can keep going, Patrick, because that's I mean, we've already pretty much gone through those. That gives you the priorities. You do have to meet two concerns. All that changes a little bit with the farm bill. So go ahead, Patrick. That's basically the same thing. This is most important. Basically, you have to have a farm and tract number. I encourage all of our landowners to come in and, come to the office, make sure that you're in the system, make sure you have a farm and tract number. You have to have all your eligibility up to date. But I mean, it's just easier to come in and make sure we have all those things. You have to have control of that land, whether you're our owner or you have permission from the owner to participate in the programs. Good, Patrick. Same, that's basically compliance. Being in compliance with highly erodible and wetland provisions. You can't have any violations. Good, Patrick. Adjusted gross income, that is, the same. All of our landowners that participate in programs have to meet that adjusted gross income, which is basically $900,000 or less adjusted gross income. You self-certify for your new and beginning, but they can be spot checked. Same thing with organic. You basically can self-certify and then you can also show your certification. Keep going, Patrick. And these are just the steps: planning, application, eligibility, ranking, and implementing. And those are basically the steps. And, as I said originally, I encourage everybody to come into the office before you, just to get started. Pull maps, look and see what's going on, look at your goals, and then go from there. Apply for the program. And then if you decide applying does not obligate you to anything until you sign on that dotted line with the contract, you can choose to participate or not. So there's no true obligation until you actually do a contract. And you can come in and get maps and technical assistance anytime. You don't have to be in one of our programs. Come into the office and get help with maps or look at soils or basic things like that. I think that's it, Patrick. Basically, there you go. There's your thing that'll take you to all of our programs. You'll find when you go to that website, you can also go to the state. because some states do have different, some different priorities, different resource concerns. So you will see the main, which we all have the same programs, but then within the states, you may see a little more specific information. I think that's it, Patrick.
All right, thank you so much. We're gonna back up, pause real quick. Jenny got back on to the call, so we'll go back to her presentation. Thank you so much, Debbie. And I believe we're just about wrapped up with Jenny's presentation. So.
Right. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened. I guess internet needed a vacation or something, but yeah, so Longleaf Alliance can provide cost share for establishment, which we kept pretty vague, and that can be up to $100 an acre, but not to exceed 50% of the cost. We can also, well, hopefully this coming grant cycle, we will have funding for mid-story reduction, and that could be for treating invasive species. That could be for reducing your stems, maybe in a pre-commercial. It could be running, a bush hog through the stand, or a masticator or something like that. We also provide cost share for prescribed burning, up to about $14 an acre. Actually, I'm hoping in this next grant cycle I can go up to $15 an acre, because I know cost of fuel and everything is continuing to rise. Once again, that's up to 50% of the cost. So we, with the Longleaf Alliance, try to be very flexible. You're not allowed to actually double dip and like use NRCS cost share funding and then, or Forestry Commission funding and then use our funding, but we will complement where we can. So, say NRCS is assisting you with planting, but they're not actually reimbursing you for the seedlings. We will try to help you with the seedling costs for longleaf. So that is, a benefit, where you can, and goes back to what Grace Anna was saying, that we all try to work together, all of these agencies, all of these groups that are here on this call tonight. We work really well together, and I'll pick up the phone and call Austin and be like, how can I help you? Or, Debbie might call me and say, hey, Longleaf Alliance, this would be a great project for the Longleaf Alliance to get involved with. So, know that we all work together to try to make sure that landowners do get the assistance they need. Next slide. So if you're interested in cost share, reach out to me. Here's my contact information. I'll kind of talk with you about your location, what activities you're looking at doing, what are your objectives, why are you managing your forest, what are you doing with your stand, what are the things that you enjoy about your stand, or how could we move your stand into that situation that you're really wanting, and then what other funding opportunities are you considering or do you already have in place. So just reach out to me, and I think that's my last slide. Patrick.
Yeah, I think the next slide is just a summary of the contact information for folks on here.
Okay.
Consulting with a forester. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Forestry Commission and NRCS have said this quite a bit, but we would like to encourage you to reach out to a forester. A forester is going to be, somebody who's going to not just tell you or kind of help guide you what your options are, what sort of activities you can do to guide your forest, change your forest into the forest you want it to be. But they're also going to help with tax implications, like how to offset your, if you're doing a timber sale, how do you offset those incomes from the last few years or for the next few years, or how to set aside money for your reforestation costs. It is, anyway, it's just a good practice. I had heard in a Clemson Extension webinar a few months ago that there are some statistics that Clemson had done that showed that when consulting with a forester, you can actually get like 18% higher revenue on your timber sales. And of course, right now we all need that with the way inflation is going. So consult with a forester, and all of the folks on the call can get you in contact with foresters that are certified through the state or registered with the state. So that's it. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation because we still have quite a few
Yeah.
folks to talk.
All right. Thank you so much, Jenny. All right. Next up, we have Nathan Eldridge with Quail Forever. I'm just going to queue up your slides real quick, Nathan.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. Like Patrick said, my name is Nathan Eldridge, and I'm a biologist with Quail Forever. Like many other people on here, I meet with landowners on a daily basis, figure out what their goals and objectives are, and try to figure out the best management practices to meet those goals and objectives, be they quail, turkey, deer, or I typically pass off forestry stuff to the forestry guys. Next slide, please. So quail and longleaf have a really long associated history in the Southeast. That's because of the way that longleaf is managed and how it grows. Longleaf pines grow in a more upward fashion. They don't really branch out until 10 years, as opposed to loblollies that branch out and close canopy much sooner. And regular fire at like a 2 to 3 year rotation really helps promote the understory growth. And as we all know, quail need understory, be it grass, forbs, and shrubs. Next slide, please. So there's been a national bobwhite effort to kind of bring back the quail, since we've seen a heavy decline since the 70s, range wide. On the left side there, NBCI put out a really nice map with a bunch of data they collected that shows the restoration potential throughout the bobwhite range. Blue is high, as you can see, and that accumulates at about 195 million acres. And on the right, you see the working lands for wildlife boundaries that NRCS has, and you can see it really overlaps well with the areas in blue. I did forget to mention that Quail Forever partners with NRCS as well as South Carolina Bobwhite, or the DNR Bobwhite Initiative. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. That's just to get out good habitat practices for quail as well as other species. This here is a map from South Carolina DNR, their Bobwhite Initiative. And there's 4 regions in South Carolina. And originally each region had to have a focal area as well. This map is a little older, and we've incorporated almost all the counties in South Carolina, I think except 5. And we've added 2 focal areas since this map was put out. Next slide. Here is the South Carolina coverage for the staff, be it Quail Forever and Bobwhite Initiative DNR biologist. I am the puke green color in the bottom corner in the low country. I cover 8 counties right in that area. I'm actually based out of Hampton as opposed to Allendale. And then I think most of y'all are from the blue area, and that's going to be Andy Krieg. He's a DNR biologist. In the bottom corner, you can see all of the contact information for the biologist. Next slide. So now I'm going to get into the practices that are available in the Quail Initiative funding pool that Debbie talked about earlier. I'm just going to go briefly through it since Debbie went talked about it more in depth. But these are all NRCS practices through EQIP. So the first one is brush management. It's really for taking care of woody invasive species, as well as unwanted species such as sweet gums. Go to the next slide. Following that, we have forest and improvement. This is going to be more thinning or single sand treatment. The one that we really focus on is the wildlife forest, thinning for wildlife and forest health. That's going to be below 60 basal area. I know foresters don't really like to see that for timber production, but we like to see it for wildlife to really open up the canopy and allow a lot of sunlight on the ground. That'll promote a lot of understory growth, which quail need. Next slide. Next up is herbaceous weed control. This is a more chemical approach, usually because of what it's focusing on, which is going to be your grasses like Bahia, Bermuda, and fescue, depending on which part of the state you are, as well as kudzu and other invasive species that have been brought over in pots mostly. Next slide. Next, we have a couple different practices. Your buffer strip and your field borders are going to be your agricultural practices. Buffer strips are used next to ditches and streams to filter out contaminants that a farmer may spray on his field. And then buffer strips are a minimum of 30 feet on the edge of your field to help have a transition from your woods to your ag field. This provides cover, nesting habitat, as well as an area for birds and other wildlife to move around in and feel protected. Prescribed burning and fire breaks are done in conjunction, and as we all know, prescribed burning is the most effective way to manage your land. Next slide. Following that is wildlife habitat planting. This is going to be your pollinator plantings, and depending on which diversity or number of species you choose, that's going to determine how many different species you need in that mix. Hedgerow plantings, in the Quail Initiative program, they need to be pollinators. So this is going to be plums and native species that flower, and most of those are going to be producing a soft mast. For the land clearing and heavy equipment, we don't really use that very often, but it is an option in the funding pool for Quail Initiative. Next slide. And lastly, we have early successional habitat and development or management. This is going to be your winter disking. You'll do this between November and February to promote ragweeds and partridge feeds, mostly your forbs. These are very attractive to insects, so they provide a high protein food source for quail, nesting hens and chicks. And they also provide a good seed source in the winter for them to help get through any harsh times and lack of food. I think that's my question slide, but that's my last slide.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. And yeah, we'll save all questions to the end, but thank you very much. Next up, we have Brett Beasley with the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program.
Thanks, Patrick. As Patrick mentioned, my name is Brett. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the lead for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program here in South Carolina. If you guys want to take a screenshot or a photo of my email address or phone number, now's a good time. Next. So South Carolina is located in the southeast region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for managing the Endangered Species Act. So here it's particularly important here in the southeast because the southeast has more threatened and endangered species than the rest of all the other regions combined. We're at 53% here in the southeast. One of our agency's goals is to downlist, delist, or prevent the need to list these species. And so our program assists with that by providing cost share and technical assistance to private landowners. In our 35-year or so history, we have completed over 50,000 projects nationwide, 4 million acres of upland habitats, 1.5 million acres of wetlands, and over 12,000 river and stream miles. Next. Here's some photos of just some general things that we've done out there on the landscape, some pollinator work, planting longleaf, rice trunk work. I do want to make a note of the second photo in the first row, or the second row, the first photo in the second row. That seed drill there, that's a specialized seed drill. It's called a Truax seed drill, and it's really good for planting blends of pollinator plants. That drill can be available to come out to your property and to assist in planting native seeds. If you've got the tractor, we've got the drill. Next. So we do a lot of different things. We do wetlands and all kinds of different stuff, but for the purpose of this presentation tonight, I'll just focus on longleaf. So here's a list of some of the common practices we do: longleaf establishment, invasive plant control, undesirable mid-story control, establishment of native understory, prescribed fire. We usually only can fund one burn though per landowner. Well, for that particular site. And that's because we just don't have a budget big enough to continue to fund all the maintenance burning that's needed on the landscape. We do fire line establishment, fire line disking, subsoiling or ripping, which is sometimes needed in ag to longleaf conversions. In some select locations, we'll install artificial red cockaded woodpecker cavity inserts. We've been pretty successful at getting birds to respond to those cavity inserts and raising chicks on private land. If you're interested in that, definitely give me a holler. We're open to pretty much any and all habitat restoration activities, restoration and enhancement activities. We don't really have a set list of practices that we have to stick to. So, you know, we can think outside the box if needed. Next. So currently we've got 3 cost share opportunities. 2 of those are really great opportunities for landowners right now. One of those is through the American Forest Foundation, and the other one is through Longleaf Alliance. We work with our partners to help distribute our federal funding. The third option is direct funding from the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. It's a little more complex. It's a longer process. So the requirements, as mentioned before, you know, we're trying to downlist, delist, or preclude the need to list species on the endangered species list. So we need to be able to show benefits to these species. And you may think, well, I'm not sure if I've got these species around my property or on my property or within a certain distance, but just don't worry about that. If you're interested, give me a call. I've got access to a occurrence record database, as well as other information that we can look into and you know, come up with that justification to be able to benefit those species. We'll consider any on-the-ground habitat restoration enhancement project, like I was mentioning earlier, not just longleaf centric, and we also we work across the entire state. Our agreements do come with a 10-year habitat retention period, so you are required to maintain the habitat for 10 years. You also, for longleaf projects, you also must be committed to applying prescribed fire at least 3 times over a 10-year period. We have no annual gross income limitations. Next. So as mentioned before, some of the species that we're looking for, these are specific to Charleston, Berkeley, Williamsburg, and Georgetown counties. You may have seen some of these on your property or around. The frosted flatwood salamander, for example, we have not been able to document that species in, I believe, 13 years now here in South Carolina. So that's a species that's definitely blinking out. And then I'd also like to mention that RCW photo there, the red cockaded woodpecker. That woodpecker is it's perched on the outside of one of those artificial cavity inserts, like I mentioned. Next. So enrollment's pretty easy. It's open for those 2 initiatives, with the American Forest Foundation and the Longleaf Alliance. That's open enrollment. Projects are considered for funding in the order they are received. If you are interested in pursuing the direct federal funding, it has a January 15 deadline to enroll, and the funding would not be available until the following fall. So if you're interested, just give me a call or email, and we can chat and talk about landowner objectives and desired outcomes and various things about your property. I'll gather location information. I'll use that to look at species occurrence records, habitat suitability models, proximity to public lands. We'll schedule a site visit together and come out and take a look. at your property and talk about things, and I'll collect some photographs. I'll take that information back and I'll create a project map and a cost estimate along with a scope of work. We provide 50% cost share on statewide rates, averages. So we collect receipts and we keep a running average of various types of practices. And those are the rates we use, and we can provide up to 50% of that. You can also do things you're in-house or do some of the things yourself and be reimbursed for them. And you're also allowed to use other cost share funds from any of these other cost share programs that you've heard from tonight. You can use any of that funding to go as towards your landowner match. So the other 50% doesn't have to be cash directly out of the landowner's pocket. Once I collect that information, there'll be an approval period where I'll work with our partners, whether it be the Longleaf Alliance, the American Forest Foundation. Once approved, I'll generate a landowner agreement or a sub-agreement if it's through a partner. And the landowner, chooses a contractor of their choice or completes some of the work themselves, and does the project. Once the project's complete, reimbursement is going to be either made through one of our partners or an online system. It'll be the online system if you go through the direct funding route as opposed to with one of our partners. This has a pretty quick turnaround period, 2 to 3 weeks from the time that I make a site visit and we determine that what we want to do on what you may want to do on your property. And then once the project has been completed and receipts are submitted, usually 2 or 3 weeks for a reimbursement check as well. Next. So yeah, if you guys got any questions, leave them in the chat. And again, there's my contact information if you guys are interested. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brett. Yeah, moving right along, we'll roll with Sam Sewell from the Low Country Land Trust.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, my name is Sam Sewell. I'm the conservation manager at the Low Country Land Trust. I'm going to talk to you about some conservation opportunities that exist with private land conservation groups in South Carolina. You can go next slide. So private land conservation has been happening in South Carolina for well over 30 years. There's over 20 accredited land trusts and conservation organizations operating in the state today. Of those organizations, 4 are members of the CW Longleaf Conservation Cooperative. You have Low Country Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, Lord Berkeley Conservation Trust, and PD Land Trust. There are over 1 million acres of privately protected land in the state. Charleston County contains a little over 76,000. Berkeley County, over 65,000, Georgetown, over 91,000, and Williamsburg County has almost 25,000 acres of privately protected land. Next slide. This map shows a distribution of the protected lands throughout the state. The green is public lands, so that's your state parks and national forests. And then in the orange is all your private lands. Next slide. So a little bit about the organization I work for. Low Country Land Trust, or LLT for short, was founded in 1986. We protected over 150,000 acres through more than 360 projects. We're a private nonprofit organization based in Charleston, and we are nationally accredited by the Land Trust Alliance. You go to the next slide. You can see these are all the properties that we protect and how they're distributed. We're worked throughout South Carolina's coastal plain in 17 counties. That's just distributed between 6 coastal focus areas. These focus area boundaries are primarily driven by watersheds and were developed by the Atlantic Coast Joint Venture. So you can go to the next slide. So there are a lot of ways in which land trusts can protect land. However, the most common way is through conservation easements. So I'm going to briefly explain the concept of the conservation easement and tell you how they can help protect and manage your property. A common analogy is to think of land ownership being represented as a bundle of sticks. Each stick represents property right, like the right to subdivide, build houses, to cut timber, to use water, etc. Next slide. When a landowner grants a conservation easement, they are essentially taking some of those sticks out of their bundle and putting them in a portfolio of property interests that the land trust is charged with safeguarding. After that, the land trust's job is to ensure forever that no one exercises those property rights. A common misconception is that when an easement is granted, the land trust takes ownership of the land, or that the land is open to the public. Neither of those things are true. The landowner still owns and is still fully in control of the land. They can keep hunting, fishing, timbering, farming, doing many other things. Landowners also frequently choose to keep the ability to have a limited number of subdivisions and residences on the property. Oftentimes, landowners will give up rights that they had no intentions of exercising in the first place. Therefore, by granting a conservation easement, they've realized financial value that was otherwise not being realized. So that leads me to my next slide. So you may be thinking, how does giving up some of my property rights to a land trust help me as a landowner? So when a landowner grants a conservation easement to a land trust, they've done several things. Granting a conservation easement can result in protection of clean water, scenic views, wildlife habitat. It can help support long-term economic sustainability by protecting resources for agricultural jobs, outdoor tourism, quality of life. All these equate to a conservation easement providing a significant public benefit. So a conservation easement is viewed by the IRS as a non-cash charitable contribution with significant public benefit. Therefore, granting a conservation easement to a land trust can qualify a landowner for federal income tax deductions. The amount of the tax deduction is determined by the value of the conservation easement. The value of a donated easement is deductible from federal income taxes, just like a contribution to a church or a charity would be. Alternatively, a landowner may use the tax deduction on state taxes. So South Carolina is one of only 5 states that allow transferable tax credits. So if a landowner donates an easement but doesn't owe enough tax to use the full credit, they can sell the remaining credit to another taxpayer, generating immediate income. If income tax deductions are not something that would benefit the landowner, there are also numerous private, local, state, and federal funding sources that will provide funds to do what is called a bargain sale purchase of the conservation easement. The land trust would acquire funding to purchase in cash a portion or the entirety of the conservation easement, rather than the landowner acquiring tax deductions. So on top of the tax deductions and income generated from the granting of the conservation easement, there are also long-term financial benefits. So conservation easements can reduce the value of a property. That in turn can potentially reduce your local property taxes. This reduction in value would also be reflected in your estate and inheritance taxes for when it moves on to the next generation. You go to the next slide. So on top of those really tangible financial benefits, there's numerous other benefits that come with donating a conservation easement. So conservation easements are great ways to do estate planning. Many landowners use conservation easements to promote family ownership for future generations. Granting a conservation easement allows a landowner to have access to certain partnerships and resources through the land trust that they've chosen to partner with. For example, LLT, we work with numerous partners, a lot of which are on this call, and we can help a landowner improve and manage their property, whether it be helping them acquire cost share funding, management advice, giving them access and letting them know about different trainings and workshops, hosting workshops, and then different funding sources for restoration activities and etc. So I'm going to stop it there, and you can go to the next slide. And there's my contact information. That was just a pretty brief summary on on what we do. So if you're interested in learning more about conservation easements and whether they're right for you and your property, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to speak with you further. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. And thank you all for sticking with us. We have reached the end of our information session, but I just wanted to take a moment and put this information up there. This is Jenny's slide. I modified it with contact information with our local representatives in Charleston, Georgetown, Williamsburg, and Berkeley counties. But we're going to transition to our Q&A session. We have about 10 minutes left this evening. But real quick, I just wanted to give another, kind of promotion for our events that we're having later on this month. You can register for them in the link with the link I'm posting in the chat right now. But again, that's August 22nd and August 29th. We will be hosting, in-person workshops where you can meet the kind folks that took the moment out of their evening to talk about cost share programs and actually fill out the application and start that application process. Like I said, we're going to be sending out this recording after the webinar, probably midday tomorrow. But there are about 2 weeks between now and the 22nd in Charleston, and then 3 weeks to our workshop in Georgetown. So what a perfect opportunity to take the opportunity in the next 2 to 3 weeks to reach out to one of these fine folks and start that process, so you can hit the ground running when you come to our workshop, either on the 22nd or the 29th. So I'm going to leave that up for right now, but you can register online in that link I just posted, using the link I just posted in the chat. But yeah, we're gonna hit the Q&A session. So I'll ask all of our panelists real quick just to turn their videos on, and if there are any questions, I've got some questions that were submitted to us before the webinar. One of which is, how do I get a farm ID? Debbie?
Sorry about that. Let me get me unmuted.
Yeah.
That is just a letter. In order to do that, you need to come into the Farm Service Agency. You'll see that was actually on the list. The Farm Service Agency is a separate agency from us, but we were all in the same office. You have to have proof of ownership to get a farm and tract number. And it is not tied to your tax ID. It's a tax ID or your tax parcel number. It is a erroneous sign letter that just identifies that land as the farm and tract, and you'll see it. You'll get a producer report. But basically, you need to come into the office and bring something that shows proof of ownership to that farm and tract. Most of the offices, I know here, not everywhere. Georgetown has a great GIS system, and they will usually go on GIS and make sure that they have the correct lines, the correct parcel, everything. But that is through the Farm Service Agency, and they'll sign you a farm and tract number with proof of ownership of that land.
Awesome. Okay. One of the questions I got was, do these programs, like the programs that we all talked about, apply to other geographies within the state of South Carolina, or is it just the CWE LIT? I'm seeing lots of head nodding. Anyone want to take that one? I'm gonna say yes, but y'all are the experts. Yeah.
I can jump in. Yeah, our program's statewide.
Okay.
Yeah, all of our programs we talked about were both state and federal. So yeah, statewide, all counties.
Awesome.
Ours also.
Yeah.
For
Okay.
for the Longleaf Alliance, a lot of our funding sources are tied to specific LITs, or the significant geographic area. So like we have a funding source directly related to CWE, and we also have a direct a funding source for Solo ACE, but the ceiling reimbursement program is throughout the state, or is actually throughout the region, the Longleaf region. So I guess it kind of just depends on who you're going to for assistance.
Yeah, thank you. Grace Anna just messaged me. Someone had contacted her. Will the notes on the screen be made available to us? If y'all are all right, I can send the slide, the PowerPoint presentation out to our attendees, and they can take all that information in as they will. But I would definitely encourage you to like reach out if you have any questions to any of these fine folks. Let's see. This is a question, I think I know who this came from. Are there any funding programs available for state lands? Do any of these cost share practices apply to state lands? Can they?
With the Longleaf Alliance, they can. And
Okay.
I believe, Brett, can you answer, have we worked before with partners in trying to make some things happen on state lands, or maybe you could speak to that?
The Partners for Fish and Wildlife program is private lands only.
Okay.
We can do local governments, county governments, that sort of thing. We do have a sister program. It's called the Coastal Program. It doesn't encompass the entire state, but they do have flexibility to be able to work on other state and federal lands.
And ours are strictly private lands. And state lands are not eligible.
Gotcha.
Nate, what about Quail Forever? Can that be on state lands too, or is that's strictly private lands?
Ours is, we do NRCS stuff, so it'd be whatever they say.
That's right.
Sure. All right. Here's another question: is how do I know which agency to work with? I mean, obviously, y'all provide like these various like practices, but how does one find like the best fit typically?
Honestly, I would say probably to start with your farm service office and get your farm and track number first, and then they can direct you out to each of us. I mean, you can call any of us individually if you want to talk to the Forester or the Longleaf Alliance or Quails. But I think for me and my personal experience, I think starting there and getting your farm track and getting into their programs, they'll div you out where you need to go.
Okay, so I just got this message in the chat. So this is a landowner that comes from the lives in the Ace Basin, and if they wanted a single name and contact number to get started on figuring it all out, as far as cost share opportunities for her family's property for forest management, like who's the person to contact in Colleton County? Would anybody know that or be able to throw that up in the chat box?
The project.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Are you talking about?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The project forester for the South Carolina Forestry Commission is Adam Forbes.
Adam Forbes. Okay.
And I can get you his contact information as well.
Yeah. That would be...
And for NRCS, it would be Jabril, right? But I'd also recommend when you guys go on to like our national website and go to the state, you can literally go on and find the contact for every county. So that's real beneficial in that form. But Jabril would be at the office. He would be my counterpart as a district conservationist.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll get the contact information for Adam and Jabril, and I will message this person after we wrap up this evening. But with that, we're pretty much out of time. Like I said, Monday, August 22nd, we're going to be at the Low Country Land Trust office for an in-person workshop where you can come in and fill out the applications and get started. Monday, August 29th, we're going to be in person in Georgetown at the Clemson Baruch Institute at Hobcob Barony. Same time frame in the evening on those Mondays. But I just want to give a special thank you to all of our panelists, thank you all for taking time out of your evening away from your families to come talk to us this evening. And then also thank you to Low Country Land Trust and Longleaf Alliance for sponsoring this. So yeah, and yeah, thank you all for attending as well. Y'all have a good night.